Hello, everyone. My name is Shane Sosa. I'm the CEO of PALCO Claims, headquartered here in New Braunfels, Texas. I'm here with a guest, Mr. Justin Addison. Um, and we're going to be talking about the insurance appraisal, the changes that are coming, things that we've seen over the years, and some of the challenges and some advice that we can give to policyholders and contractors who are navigating the property claims space. So, for those of you who don't know, again, I have been a public adjuster since 2019. I've been doing appraisals since that time, and I've appraised virtually almost every loss that you can think of, from hurricanes to fires, both commercial and residential. I've worked on claims where school buses have crashed into a used car dealership. You name it, I've probably done it. Um, and I've done umpire, do a lot of umpire work. And so the topic of today is really kind of passionate for me because I do this every single day. I think last year, on top of my public adjusting claims, I did about 160 appraisals and about 45 umpire assignments last year. So um, that's a little bit about me. Justin, I want to give you the floor. Let people kind of hear from you, who you are, your background, and you know what you bring to the table in today's conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Shane. I appreciate you having me on. Kind of a similar story. I started in claims as an independent adjuster in 2010. And so been lucky enough, I guess you could say, to have a front row seat to some significant seismic changes in our industry, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. After But it was probably about middle of 2018 because I had a little transition period, and finally got my PA license in 2020. And I'll tell you what sparked that was some of the, and people question this, but a lot of the PAs I meet were former IAs, and they've got a similar story where some of the things they were asked to do were either in that gray area that, it doesn't look or sound right, but it's not necessarily illegal. And some things are just overtly unethical and a blatant violation of insurance code and statutes. So after a few of those requests, which I never complied with, I always said, yeah, you can reassign it if you want somebody to do that. I had a pretty defining moment where I reached a crossroads, and what they asked me to do is something that, I'm not going to get into all that, but it was an eye opener to me that if they're going to ask me to do that, they'll ask anybody to do it. And there's plenty of people that'll take the paycheck and do whatever they're told. And so I've had this epiphany that there are not enough policyholder advocates out there. And not only that, there seems to be a lack of high quality in the pool there is to select from. There's a very limited access, I guess you could say, to competent and well-trained and well-educated public adjusters. So, I mean, we can talk more about that later, but in any case, that was the realization I had. And so I made the transition. I got my PA license. I let my IA license lapse once I felt comfortable that I never really wanted to go back on that side of things. Not that I'm opposed to it entirely, but you got to kind of pick a side of the fence, right? And that was 2020, right before the pandemic. And so it's been an incredible experience. I count myself very fortunate. I was coming in as an IA. They have, I guess you could call it a plethora of resources for you. The carriers make sure that, they're not going to sit you down and train you on the policy and all that kind of stuff. You should know that after your licensing exam, but they do make available a lot of highly experienced adjusters and trainers to help you get the hang of, learning the ropes initially. And so I credit a lot of my education to my IA career. And, but I will say the amount that I have learned after making that switch is incredible. The things that were just that you're never told, or they're either deliberately concealed, or they're not shared because they're not necessarily applicable and important to your role in that moment. But it's been quite a ride, to say the least. And so I also started handling appraisals about the same time. I've handled, I don't know, probably 600 or 700 appraisals over the last 5 or 6 years. And it's finally getting to where it's so prevalent that we need to be having these conversations. People need to understand what the process is and how to go about, and when it's appropriate to be going down that path. So I appreciate you having me on here today to discuss that.
No, perfect. That's a perfect segue. So, obviously we've both been doing appraisals for several years at this point, and we can probably both attest, and I'm sure we'll get into it. Some of the things that we've seen, some horror stories, some significant wins and things like that. But the first thing we're going to jump into is the new TDI appraisal rules from Senate Bill 458. So there are some big changes that are coming down the pipe. I also got to speak at the open forum. I forget what it's called, but where basically you come out and you voice your concerns, ask your questions and things like that in front of the insurance commissioner. So I was able to do that. But what I want to do is kind of jump into some of the things that are coming down the pipe, and we can kind of just chop it up from there. So one of the bullet points in this bill is no more mutual consent. So if appraisal becomes mandatory, it will become a mandatory unilateral right. If either policyholder or carrier invokes it, the other party cannot block it by claiming there isn't a true impasse. So at least in my experience, and I'm sure you have the same one, we've had carriers, a lot of carriers, I'm talking all the big ones where, you've done your due diligence, you provided your proof of loss, you provided your evidence, and then they're like, no, we disagree. And then you invoke your right to appraisal, right? And then the insurance company might say, no, we feel an appraisal is inappropriate, or your appraisal demand is denied, or, something to that effect. So this Senate bill, when it comes effective in September 1st, they won't be allowed to do that anymore because it's very clear it's part of the law. And even the policy, and what I think is interesting is the policy, as you know, and the appraisal clause says either party may demand appraisal, right? There is no thing in any policy that I've ever seen. Well, there are some, but where it says, only if there are certain criteria are met or certain conditions are met. It just says, hey, if you have a dispute in the amount of loss, either party can demand appraisal. Very simple, right? Have you? I was gonna say, have you been part of claims where they've denied you trying to go to appraisal?
Yes, I have, and sorry to interject there, but one thing I think is important to point out is the language does not include a statement to the effect of either party can refuse appraisal. It's either can demand it, but there's no, and it's kind of broad. It's a little vague, and as many call it, and specifically John C. Robinson calls it, it's a creature of the contract. So now that we're seeing so much of it, legislation has become necessary. But yeah, it's not often. It's become more common, I would say, in the last 8 to 12 months. I didn't run into a lot of rejections prior to that, but it seemed like here more recently, there's been so much changing and evolving in the industry of claims across the board that you have to be able to adjust in more way than just a claim. You've got to be adaptable. And I think they've anticipated legislation, and so in the meantime, they're getting their hits in while they still can before the tides change.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that I do, and I share this with other public adjusters as a strategy, is I try to take appraisal off the table. If they want to take it off the table, I try to take it off the table so that if and when it has to go to an attorney, they don't turn around and once an attorney gets involved, the carrier then invokes appraisal, which actually just happened to us a couple of weeks ago. We tried to demand appraisal. We escalated it internally. We filed a TDI complaint. We did all the things that we could do to get it into appraisal, and they weren't going to go. So the only thing you can do at that point is refer it to an attorney, correct? So we refer it to an attorney, and the attorney sends their demand, and I kid you not, within a couple of days, hey, the insurance company demands appraisal. And I'm like, no. So what we're trying to do is, or said that the attorney's trying to do is try to, file a motion to, like, no, we're going to litigate this because, the insurance company denied. It was in writing. They did it multiple times, right? So we have what could be considered a breach of the policy, right? Which is an action that can be brought against the carrier. So, like I said, I think this bill, at least in that part, will stop that from happening because there are plenty of claims that can be resolved through appraisal, and some claims need to go to an attorney. So the other thing that comes into play is the strict 1-year limitation. So a major debate that has been like, when should claims go to appraisal? And as you know, appraisal does not toll the statute of limitations. So, and I don't know how long you've ever seen an appraisal go for, but I've seen an appraisal go for 21 months.
2 years here, 2.5 I've seen. It's absurd.
Yeah.
But that's the outlier, of course. It's rare that you see that. Was that Texas, the case you were talking about where they?
Yes.
Yeah, that doesn't shock me. Texas and Oklahoma.
Yep. And so yeah, it was a Texas case. It was actually a derecho claim in May of 2024. That claim just got resolved earlier this year, but it went to appraisal. They inspected the property in November of 2024, and they didn't sign the award until almost March of 26, or maybe it's February 26. It was wild. It was wild. But in any case,
can you explain what caused some of those delays that drug it out that long, or was it just appraisers that drug it?
If I'm being really honest, it was both sides of the panel. They were not great at communication. It was bad. They told the homeowner to their face in November 2024, hey, don't worry, this is a simple dispute. It was a $30,000 dispute. Nothing crazy, right? 30 grand is easy to reconcile. They told the insured back in November, oh, we'll have this wrapped up by January. So they gave themselves 2 months, which is a reasonable time
That's
frame.
fair. Yeah.
Right.
Set a reasonable expectation.
And then a year and a half more. It was wild. And the other thing, and I'll be one to say it. Every one of those people that on that panel were IAUA members. I'm a former member. I elected not to renew it. I filed complaints against people on the panel as a member myself. If you go into the IAUA rules and ethics, and I've made this public on Facebook before, so none of what I'm saying is not already
it's not
made
secret.
public.
You're right.
Yeah, it's not a secret, but I filed a bylaws complaint against these members of the panel as a former member. And my complaint was completely dismissed. I've had other people on the board of IAUA reach out and try to look into it. That didn't go anywhere. So I kind of lost faith in that organization. Now, John C. Robinson's plan organization is something that I'm looking into as well, because I do think education around appraisal and staying on top of things is very, it's just a good practice.
It's necessary. Right? It is absolutely necessary with how quickly and significantly things can change in our industry, not just limited to the appraisal process, but just anywhere in claims. Continued education is there for a reason. Right. And appraisal has become such a go-to tool these days. And a lot of people reach into that bag and grab that tool without really knowing what it's for. They've seen it work before, and they kind of, on the whole, understand it just enough to be, what was the saying? They understand just enough to be dangerous, or just enough to get themselves in trouble. So,
right.
So these organizations are helping, I think, educate people to prevent that, so that the appraisers that are being hired by not just the carriers, but the homeowners advocate side too, have the opportunity to say, wait a minute, why are you doing this? And are you sure this is the right path to go down? Right.
And I was going to say, and circling back, in a lot of contractors and policyholders, they don't even know what appraisal is and how it works. To your point, they've used it once or twice and they've had some success, but with these new rules, and they're going to have that 1-year limitation, you want to make sure that you're not dragging that out, so where like someone like you or myself can come in and be very, very limited on how we can help those people, right? So you want to get the claim filed promptly, which ultimately, as we all know, prompt notice is a good thing when filing a claim. Give prompt notice. Don't be filing hail claims on 21 months after the date of loss, which some policies do allow for. But yeah, I mean, you would definitely want to make sure that this 1 year limitation is something you're paying attention to. And then going back to what we talked about with the timelines, that this bill is going to create some procedural timelines. And I'll have a question for you here in a second on this one. The rules establish that there's 20 days to name an appraiser. That's been the norm forever. Then usually the two appraisers will agree on an umpire. And what's going to happen now is for these new rules is that there's going to be 120 days maximum for appraisers to agree on the amount of loss. And if they don't agree with those in those 20 days, then the umpire gets involved and the umpire has another 120 days. So ideally, what's the new law is going to be, there's going to be a 240-day maximum for the appraisal to be resolved. Now, you and I both know 240 days, on most appraisals is way too much time as it is.
Yeah.
But I would have loved to have that rule of a 240 days on my last one because, like I said, they blew past that deadline and the umpire was involved. My question to you is, and I have not been able to answer this question, what are the repercussions, right? When we
That's exactly what I was going to ask you.
Yeah,
Who
what are the
enforces
repercussions?
this?
Yeah. What happens if you go at day 241, right? When you have the umpire involved, and what happens at day 241? What happens if we go 385 days, right? What are the penalties? Because if a carrier appraiser or even the policyholder appraiser, there's bad apples on both sides of the fence, right? You accept an assignment and you're on vacation for 2 or 3 weeks and you can't work the appraisal properly and you blow the deadline. What are the repercussions for you? I mean,
Well, if there's no licensing requirement, there's no medium through which they can be regulated directly.
right.
So the reality is anybody can be an appraiser and be named as one. They're real limited in, and it varies from policy to policy as you're aware, but they're limited in the listed qualifications that they put there. And oftentimes they're limited to competent and disinterested or unbiased and impartial or whatever. It's something really broad and vague like that, but they do that to benefit their side as well. Because how do you get anybody who's unbiased in this industry completely? Now, obviously there are going to be people who kind of run more in the middle, and I consider myself there because I've worked both sides. I've seen that the reality is most claims do get paid fairly.
Right.
But that has changed more recently, and PAs often see only the disputed claims, and appraisers only see disputed claims. So it can sour, the taste you have about whatever the opposing side is. I think that's very important, is how do you enforce this, and who's to say that the two appraisers can't agree? Hey, man, I'm going to be out of town for the next couple of weeks. Let's get back together August 15th, and we'll reconvene. Even though that's beyond this 120-day timeline, what's the umpire going to do? Be waiting on the edge of their seat, ready to send an email? Hey, guys, hey, you don't have your hall pass today.
Yeah.
There's a quote from an attorney that I've worked with, and actually he was a client of mine. He's one that fights insurance companies, but he recognized when they had a loss to one of their commercial properties that, hey, I don't have time for this. Let me get a PA involved, and then if I have to, I'll do the lawsuit. But anyways, he said something that has stuck with me profoundly, and it was, laws don't enforce themselves.
Right.
And I thought, no truer words have ever been spoken. You can write whatever law you want, and speed limit, for example, you're driving down the highway. Some people are doing 85, some are doing 55. But if there's not a police officer there or a camera, something ready to write you a ticket, it's, you're getting away with it. And the more people get away with it, the more emboldened they become. And that I think is what we're really seeing in the industry right now, is there's been a lack of enforcement and a lack of true objective regulation. And because of that, it's like bank robbers. They didn't start robbing banks.
Right.
They started with petty crimes and then eventually worked up to the first time they robbed a bank and they didn't get caught. And imagine the feeling they had when they drove off with all that money. Whoa, that was easy. You mean we could do this and get away with it? Guess let's try that again. And eventually, by the time these guys get caught, it's very rare that that's the first time they pulled something like that off or attempted it. And
Right.
so the more you get away with something, the more emboldened you become. And those bad actions, those bad behaviors escalate to a point where, in summary, you can only sell your integrity once. And once
Right.
you've sold it, everybody's has a price. I do believe that. But I personally have not been offered what my price is, and I don't know what it is. And I won't
Right.
know probably ever. But it would take a lot of money. And I'd like to think that I would never sell it, but we're all human beings. If someone came with $1 billion, I think most of us would say yes. But if that's what it's going to take, I think we're safe. Nobody's
right.
coming to offer me that kind of money to
Yeah,
lie
right.
about something.
Well, you talked about impartiality and things like that, and for I think on the policyholder side, it's a little bit harder because at the end of the day, like you're always going to be biased or partial to the person paying your bill, right? If so,
Some degree, yeah.
yeah, I mean, if someone's hiring you, you want to inherently do a good job for that person who's ultimately going to pay you the invoice at the end of the day.
Right.
Now, when you work for Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Johnson or Mr. Adams or whomever, right, the chances of you working for that person again are probably very, very low.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, on the carrier side, as you know, when you do 300 appraisals for State Farm and your checks are coming from one location, yeah, of course you're going to be biased to that one because a large portion of your income comes from that one entity where you and
can't not
I,
be.
our checks are coming from one policyholder, one time, maybe ever, right? So how partial and biased can we be to Mrs. Smith whenever, insurance carrier appraiser is getting, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from
Exactly.
that. So that's my quick. So
Exactly.
that's my problem with partiality, and I think that more public adjusters, and I know some, and I've done some on the insurance carrier side. We did some for Travelers last year. We did probably about 40 something appraisals for Travelers, and I was trying to get more on the list of insurance companies because I think insurance companies should be hiring more public adjusters.
100%.
Yeah,
100%. I agree. And it helps us if, God forbid, we're being deposed and they want to paint us as being biased, in favor of the insurance, which we're their fiduciary. Of course, we're putting their interest first. However, like you said, it's a one-time thing. Maybe they own multiple properties, and it could be, at most, you're talking like maybe they hire you a dozen times, and that's if
right,
they got a lot of property, because
right,
most of them, they're not going to need that. So any bias that's there is tied to the fiduciary duty. But if you can show that, hey, I work for the carriers too, and when I do, I write it the exact same way as when I'm being paid by the insured. That really, I think, sets a firm foundation to be able to refute any claims that somebody's partial or biased towards one individual insured when you've got a Fortune 50 company that is this guy's entire livelihood is relying upon. It's easy to see, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a human thing. We're all going to have to answer to somebody, right? We all got somebody who's paying us, even if it's just one time. They're the one paying us. We got to answer to them. It doesn't mean we have to agree with them. It doesn't mean we have to do what they say.
right.
But when you're talking about, like you said, multiple six figures annually, that's a big incentive to, maybe it just means, I won't agree so easily. I'll just take it to umpire.
Yep.
I'll be quick to umpire. And that's something that, we live in the gray in claims. So something like that, it'd be hard to paint it definitively as being done for that purpose. So it's all, it's all kind of, so fluid, it gets exploited.
Yeah, you brought up a good point when just kicking into umpire. So I do at least 40 plus umpire assignments a year for the last couple of years now, and I'm getting off the record conversations with carrier appraisers who are trying to not bite the hand that feeds them, right? So I've been told
they will explicitly say those words.
Hey, I'm kicking this to you as umpire because I can't buy this. It should be bought. I'm not going to push back.
They won't put it in writing, but they'll tell you on the phone.
But they'll call me. They'll call me. Yep. And so I see those all the time. And I'm just like, so that is someone who is afraid to do the right thing because they're biased towards their principal, if you will, and they want to keep getting more work, right? That's what they want to do. They don't want to lose that paycheck. So
Yeah, you got to do a good job to stay employed. And, everybody's definition of a good job is different.
let's change gears here. I want to talk about, appraisal whenever there's coverage issues. And so obviously you and I both know that's a big red flag, big no. The biggest one that I've seen in Texas has been around the cosmetic damage exclusion. So, obviously if the carrier is affirming a defense of there's cosmetic damage exclusion, there's no coverage here. And some people, public adjusters, even attorneys, I'm doing an appraisal right now for an attorney on a State Farm claim with the HO 2722 endorsement that says it must completely penetrate through the metal. And
That's so absurd.
I told
That
the
language
attorney,
is illusory.
I told the attorney, I was like, I don't think this is going to help your client unless you just want to establish an amount of loss. If you're going to appraisal just to establish amount of loss, okay, fine.
Right. It's great for that.
Yeah, but it's not going to solve your covered. State Farm's not going to pay the award. They're just not going to do it, right? So he's like, okay, well, let me worry about that. But in any case, what is your opinion, or what have you seen as far as coverage issues and kind of horror stories where the appraisal has gone wrong? They've misused appraisal whenever they shouldn't have. Give me an example of something you've seen.
Well, so I want to preface with that varies from state to state.
Yeah.
So obviously we're primarily focused on Texas, but you and I both work other states, and you really got to know, you can't just go from Texas where the laws are extremely consumer friendly. We've got a lot of case law on the books, and then go to somewhere like, I'll use this example because I have personal experience there for a decade, Maryland, where there's like zero case law. And so there's a lot of attorneys that they're not crazy about taking files because they don't have case law to point to in Maryland. And without getting off on a tangent on that, my experience has been in the state of Texas, coverage can be appraised, but you're not going to force the carrier to get that coverage. Correct. So by coverage being appraised, I'm more so try to narrow that focus to causation. If they're saying it's wear and tear and you're saying it's hail, that can be resolved in appraisal. If they get that award, 90+% of the time, they're going to pay it. Because once they kick it to that bucket of their appraisal team or whatever, that individual's there to monitor the file, send a status letter when required by statute, and when the award comes, review it, make sure the calculations are correct, and cut a check. And so you're occasionally, if there's a coverage dispute on the front end, they're going to be looking at it more closely. But if it's something like wear and tear versus hail, or a situation like that where the primary dispute is causation, I don't end up seeing a lot of back-end denial of the award. Those generally go through pretty smoothly. But your example of the cosmetic exclusion, that is perfect for litigation. Yeah. An appraisal, there is no magic wand in this industry. And every time you turn around and the focus shifts, where people start doing it this way, and then that stops working, so we're going to do it this way. Everybody looks at that like, hey, we found the magic wand. There isn't one. There's a toolkit, and we've got a lot of tools to our disposal. And just like real tools, they have a specific job under certain circumstances where they will perform very effectively. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people have leaned on appraisal as a means of avoiding litigation because they don't want to pay an attorney. And I get it. None of us do. Nobody wants to go to litigation. But the truth is sometimes that's what has to happen. Right. And you don't want to back yourself into a corner by demanding appraisal and then getting an unfavorable award, and then saying, oh, now I want to sue them. Hey, somebody didn't explain this process to you very well if this is the path you think it's going to go. So that's Texas, and I will say kind of in a contrast to that, and so to elaborate on that, I try to pre-qualify everything. As a PA, I'm reviewing it with the contractor, whoever's referring it, with the homeowner, talking about everything, and then I'll give them my opinion on, hey, I think you probably could get an appraisal demand sent here and get this resolved within 2 to 3 months on average. And then there's, I don't know, we got a coverage issue here. You probably need a PA to establish that. It doesn't mean they're going to pay it when the PA approves it, but proof is proof. And then that's something you can stand on in court, or occasionally, but rarely, I say, there's not really anything I can do for you. You guys have gone way too far down the wrong path. You need to get an attorney or at least talk to one. And the contrast to that is coverage issues in North Carolina. North Carolina is the state that appraisal is limited essentially to pricing disputes only. Mm-hmm. So if you demand appraisal, and it doesn't mean that the scope never changes. I mean, appraisal is very gray, so oftentimes the scope does change most of the time, I'd even say.
Sure.
But they do have a leg to stand on if they want to direct their appraiser, and that by they, I mean the carrier, and say, hey, here's a copy of our estimate. This is all we've extended coverage for. We better not see an estimate that has anything different line item wise from that, unless there's some job specific costs we haven't considered. Sure. And it gets gray because when you start getting into like repairability of shingles and stuff like that, you're in means and methods now. You're not in coverage or causation, but you have so many contractors working in PAs, everybody does it in multiple states, and they just take the mindset of where they work the most and they try to apply it where they're going.
Right.
And it's creating a lot of unfortunate outcomes for the people that we're supposed to be protecting.
Yep. And I've seen appraisal be misused frequently. So I say this with love to all my contractors out there.
Yeah.
But I do the same pre-qualification to make sure, is it ready for appraisal? Does it still need to be handled by a PA first? Most of my State Farm claims that I will take on, because of how the appraisal clause reads, you have to have an itemized demand estimate submitted 10 days before appraisal can be demanded, right? And I've seen this happen before where, the contractor didn't document or didn't put the interior damage on the appraisal, or didn't put it on their demand estimate. So goes to State Farm accepts the appraisal, but it's just exterior items only. There's the two room interior leaks aren't on the demand estimate. Well, the two appraisers go out, they agree on everything, right? They sign an award without an umpire. It's got the interior damage, it's got O&P on it, it's all the things. And then State Farm removes the interior from the award because the interior was never in dispute.
Right.
So that is a claim that was not set up for appraisal to begin with. Another example is, and we just had this one done recently, where the contractor sent it straight to appraisal and it had some siding issues. They agreed on some of the siding and they got an award out. Everything's fine. Only to come back now and to find out that they pulled an ITEL after the award and the siding is discontinued and there's no available siding. And I understand that you can probably go back to the panel, but that's such an uphill battle. I've seen carriers be very agreeable. I've seen the carriers shut it down completely. Nope, appraisal is final and binding.
Yeah.
Tough start for you.
Good luck convincing the inexperienced adjuster that you can revisit, because legally you can.
Yes.
But so many of them are of that mindset. Well, we got an award. That's it.
Yeah.
No more. And
Yeah.
and you got to elevate over that person's head if you're going to have any luck. But you're right. It's all about prepping it on the front end. And appraisal, the most important thing people can understand about appraisal is we are limited to the dispute. And when you send in the demand, you better be establishing the dispute as well. And I tell all my clients, awards generally come back somewhere between the carrier's estimate and the contractor.
Sometimes.
It is a negotiation. There are concessions made. I've seen awards that are higher than both estimates. Not often,
Yep.
but it does happen. And I've seen attempted awards of zero after the carrier's extended coverage, which don't even get me started on that. That
Yeah.
tactic is one that the people who use it regularly. And I think it is abhorrent.
Well,
But if you can't establish that, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was gonna push back a little bit on what you just said, where appraisal is limited to to what's in dispute, because depending on like the State Farm appraisal clause, I 100% agree with you. It is limited to what's in dispute, but like this typical all-state appraisal clause where it just says, either party may demand appraisal. You have 15 days to name an umpire. That is, in my experience, not limited to the dispute. And I've actually done appraisals for law firms where there is no demand estimate. It's been crazy. I was like, what's in dispute? And they were like, I don't know. And I'm like,
That's the smart way to go. If you can do it, leave it
yeah,
open-ended,
yeah,
because then
uh,
everything's on the table and they can apply the policy coverages after the fact.
yeah, yeah. And I've done that. Yeah, it was a tornado loss. It was in 2023, and I think the carrier paid like 80 grand, and I'm named by the appraiser from the law firm, and they're like, yeah, we want to go to appraisal. And I'm like, okay, so what's the demand estimate? And they're like, we don't have one. And I'm like, okay, so what are we disputing? Is this a $10,000 dispute? Is this a $100,000 dispute? What is it, right? And so I got an award. It's another like $130,000 above the carrier estimate. I'm like, I thought it was good, right? But is the contractor going
I
to
don't know if it's too much.
yeah,
You
right.
don't
Like
know what they were
maybe the
looking
client
for.
only needed 100 grand to do all the work, and I got them extra 30 grand. I mean, that's good for them. But like, at the end of the day, I've been doing this long enough to know, a reasonable amount of loss. But yeah, appraisal in my mind is in lieu of litigation. You shouldn't have to go to appraisal and then go to an attorney. So I preface it with my clients and contractors and say, look, if you've done everything that you can do from the PA side or even the insured side, and you haven't reached a settlement, then you have two options: appraisal or attorney. And not all claims are right for appraisal, and not all claims need to go to an attorney. So the policyholder advocates, the public adjusters like us, need to determine what is the most appropriate route. Most contractors are using it as a reinspection, right? They're just thinking, well, they denied
Throw it
it.
at the wall and see if it
Yeah,
sticks.
we'll get it in appraisal. It's fine. And to your point earlier, it's been working, right?
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing, is it's being reinforced.
Yes, it's been working. Like, yeah, we'll just, they denied it as wear and tear. They bought like 4 shingles and they didn't want to do it, so we'll just send it to appraisal, and it works.
Yeah.
So it's a dangerous tool, and that I tell contractors, just because it's been working, you've been lucky.
Yeah. Tools wear. All tools wear as the more you use them. And in with that analogy in this process, the more you exploit one of these options that you have because it's effective, the more likely you are to draw carrier and legislative attention to that, where they're going to go, we're closing that up. We're going to button that down as soon as possible. And instead of now having that tool to use it when it's necessary, because it's, in my opinion, if we're using a tool analogy, it's very specialized. Mm-hmm. It's not a tool you pull out of your bag every day. Nowadays, it's everywhere, but 5-6 years ago, you and I both know that this was very rare to even see. And most of the time, it was a file that was already in litigation. And the attorneys agreed, let's send it to appraisal to set the amount of loss, and we'll litigate bad faith and all the other stuff after. But the more you use it, the more it wears. And especially if you're not using it right.
Right.
So here we are now. We're at the stage where legislative attention's been brought to the process because it's being used so much. And I don't think that's a good or a bad thing. I mean, I think there's pros and cons to both sides of that. But it's just, what you don't want to do is make that tool render it useless.
Right.
Because they will take all the teeth out of it if they have their way. I mean, we're already seeing, like you've given examples where, no. We're going to reject your appraisal demand. Then we assume, well, we're going to go to appraisal. Wait a minute. So you can use the tool, but I can't. So they're already going to be playing those kinds of games. And I mean, when I say they, I mean both sides. I want to be very clear that I am critical of every side of this industry, because there are not bad actors limited to one side or the other. And bad actors beget more bad actors. And we see that where when you try to call out behavior of one individual or company or group or whatever in this space, oftentimes the knee-jerk defensive response is, well, they're doing such and such. Mm-hmm. What does that have to do with what I'm talking about right now? And nothing that they're doing justifies what you're doing, but that's the back and forth that's gotten us into this quagmire that we're wading through as it currently sits.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's the other thing too, is going back to the new rules that are coming out and the lack of enforcement that I think is going to be an issue with these new rules. Like, who's going to enforce them? Where are the penalties going to come in? And if you have an appraiser on either side who's consistently violating these new laws, when are we going to kick that person and disqualify them as being a competent appraiser? If you're breaking the laws consistently, are you competent? You can't be considered competent if all you do is break the law. So that it's just crazy.
Well, and remember, this is civil.
Yeah.
It's not a criminal statute.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the penalty?
Mm-hmm.
They haven't outlined fines or anything that I've seen in this legislation. It's well, you better follow the law.
Yeah.
Or what?
Exactly.
And of course, I'm the type of person, I'm going to do everything I can within my power and will to follow the law. But I also understand human beings well enough to know that most people, if they have an opportunity to exploit it, they will. And they don't care what the law says until, it comes time to pay the piper.
I want to talk about a little bit about the danger of invoking appraisal too early. Oftentimes, contractors, they just want to hurry up and get the claim paid so they can slap on the roof or do the work or whatever. So they're like, let's just hurry up and put it into appraisal. Let's skip the PA. Let's do this. What are some of the dangers of invoking appraisal too early?
Well, I want to wrap into that and come into it. It's important to see the perspective of the things that are driving this. Contractors get killed by the delays. Payment processing, mortgage companies, just the approval process alone. This is a high cash flow industry, but that cash flow comes through and out really quick. And there's a lot of delays before it comes in. So they're incentivized to look for any way they can to expedite the process, which is driving this. And so to segue into your question about what are the dangers, two parts to this. If you're going to include a waiver outside a year, or after a year from the date of loss, you can't invoke appraisal. One, I'd be curious if the carriers like that or not, because they really like appraisal once suit has been filed. They like having that in their back pocket. They don't like it before, and they're becoming accustomed to, hey, this is the new claims process. We can eliminate supplements altogether. We can pay the guys that used to be IAs come out and do an appraisal. Yeah, they're a little more expensive than they used to be, but guess what? That is binding. It is final. No more 4, 5, 6, 7 supplements that are piecemealed in because they can get a little one approved, but they're afraid they won't get the whole chunk if they send it all at once. And then by the end, what are all the time and resources the carrier spent processing each one of those supplements? As much as they would have paid any appraiser. So it's a win-win for them. And the whole idea of this is to dispose of the claim permanently. Get it closed. Settle it. Deny it. Whatever you got to do, but make it go away so we can archive it and never hear about it again. Right. So they're incentivized to continue down this road. And I would be curious if they support the 1-year waiver. But the dangers of coming in and invoking it too early, you cannot, depending on how early you do it, you may not have had an opportunity to do a thorough investigation of the loss.
Exactly.
Sometimes you don't know what it looks like under the shingles until they're torn off.
Correct.
Sometimes there's not adequate access to even see what the condition of the decking is. Is there a leak that hasn't yet made its way to the drywall ceilings in the house? Is there space decking up there? And everybody in this industry, if you've got 6, 7 months, has seen they tore the shingles off. Surprise! This decking's only 1/4 inch. Or, it's space decking. Or, we got wood shakes under this. And there's reasons that happens, and it's going to continue to happen. It's not always possible to get all of the information up front, but it's important to know everything that you can know before going into appraisal. If you can't know about the decking before appraisal, and you go to appraisal, you get the roof bought, and you tear it off, and you find the decking has to be brought to code compliance,
right?
That should be able to be supplemented and addressed by the adjusters.
Right, it should be, and I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen before. Yeah, I've seen it happen before, specific to decking. But what's your opinion on? Let's say you got to a loss, you and the carrier appraiser, you can't look at the decking, you can't see it. There's no way to get to it, and so there's no way for you to know if it should be included or not. What is your opinion on an open line item for decking? And it's just, and the F9 note is, the appraisers will not be able to appraise and inspect the decking, and just kind of leaving it open, which I'm not really a fan of, but at the same time too, like to your point, and I say this all the time, everything that is known should be known prior to appraisal.
Right.
Appraisal should not be for finding out new information. It's not.
It's not the investigation.
Correct.
That should have already been done. It's what are the means and methods to restore the property?
So what's your opinion on putting an open line? So like all the, pretty much it could be anything, right? It could be, but decking is probably the most common one. If you can't inspect the decking, if you can't look under the shingles and see if there's wood shakes underneath it, putting an F9 note or an open line item. What are your thoughts on, and maybe protecting the integrity of the claim, not even necessarily the insured, because if the policy owes for it, it owes for it, right?
Right.
So it's not about protecting the insured, but just getting the amount of loss correct. As appraisers, we're supposed to set a proper amount of loss. So like, what are some things that you could recommend for when you can't know something during your inspection to hopefully let the adjuster see that, oh, yep, the appraisers couldn't have seen this. The contractor found it post-award when they were doing the roof. And so my thing is, like I said, an open line item, but what are your thoughts on open line items?
I like it, but I'll say, it's a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
How many open-ended line items can you put in there?
Oh, a lot.
You've opened a can of worms of now, it's kind of a never-ending list of what hasn't been appraised. And generally my experience has been the carrier appraisers, and I'm of the same mindset, we're there to settle this thing. We're not there to leave the door open for the adjuster to go in behind. Now, granted, there are exceptions to that, and you've described perfect ones, but their mindset is, hey, the carrier sent me out here to close this thing out. What's it going to take to make it go away? And if you know ahead of time, like ongoing ALE, if the home is uninhabitable, you're delineating that on the award and you're saying not appraised. Specifically, correct. A lot, they get lazy and they put 0. No. Correct. If you put 0, the amount of loss is 0. You put not appraised, and that leaves it open. Now you're counting on the competence of the person reviewing it on the back end to know, hey, this is still an open item that we can address. But I'm a big fan of, if there's something we don't know, let's clarify that. Let's do something in the award letter that classifies the fact that there very well could be information that was not known or accessible at the time the award was issued, and that should be considered and reviewed for potential coverage in the future. And if you can be really broad like that, you really leave the door open.
Right.
You get pushback from that, from the carrier side appraisers from that, because again, they feel like their job is to resolve it, but some things just can't be known until you get to the future. And I think if you're going to make sure that you leave the door open for that kind of stuff, the less specific you can be, probably the better.
Right.
So if the decking might be an issue, that we've not addressed all code issues, potential code compliance issues with this award. We have limited it to the knowledge we had at the time of the award. Any new information should be reviewed for potential coverage.
So that's a great thing, which I think should be on all executed appraisal awards, which I've never really seen, but I think I might start including it on my awards now. This is just we appraise everything that could have been known at the time of the loss or at the time of our inspection. So,
or even it's limited to the dispute. If you put something like that in there, that opens everything that's not in the dispute. So that you paint with a broad brush, just like the legislators and the carriers do. Leave that opportunity for interpretation when the certain circumstances arise that call for it.
And we're coming down to our final minutes here, but I wanted to ask a question that is I've seen to be an issue with multiple appraisers. When you're appraising the amount of loss, are we appraising the total amount of loss as it pertains to to the peril? So if it was a hail claim, for example, you're not going to appraise the kitchen fire damage, right? That's right. But are you appraising the amount of loss related to the peril or the amount of covered loss related to the peril? And here's my question. If we read the policy and we get a copy of the policy and we know that there's no building code upgrade or no ordinance and law coverage in the policy, and we know that the house doesn't have drip edge, it doesn't have a chimney cricket, it doesn't have enough adequate ventilation, right? So there's things that we need to put in the estimate, the appraisal award, that are not going to be covered by the policy. What is your interpretation on do we put those code items in the award knowing that they're not covered, or do we exclude them because we know they're not covered? What's your opinion on that?
We're there to set the amount of the loss, not the amount of the insured loss, not the amount of the covered loss, the amount of the loss.
Correct.
So I'll give an example where I had an appraisal where they had a matching endorsement that provided coverage for undamaged roofing and siding materials, had a cap at like 20 grand, which was nowhere near enough for the size of this house. They tried to put as much under that endorsement up front as possible. They paid for like 8 shingles, and it was not repairable. So they should have paid slope by slope basis. But then, you blew your limits. Here's your 20 grand. And when we got to the point where we were issuing the award, we made sure that we delineated, here's the damage that this all has to happen because of the damage, but for the loss, these slopes have to be replaced. The rest of it, there's nothing wrong with it, but it won't match, and that applies to the endorsement. So I think exercising the ability to delineate the award, and what I mean by that is specifying, hey, for example, the code issue that you rose, if we know that there's these code items you've mentioned that aren't existent, and if the policy affords coverage for it, they should be included. But we don't always get a copy of the policy. Carrier adjusters don't always get a copy of the policy. So we can only work with the information we have. And what I do, and I've had a lot of success getting opposing appraisers to agree with that. And I hate that term opposing because we're there to reach the same goal. But in any case,
right,
putting that under code related or ordinance and law related portions of the loss, because the truth is that's money that somebody's going to have to pay. So it is part of the loss. It doesn't mean that it's covered. And then if you put everything under that, then they have the opportunity, which they state when they issue their reservation of rights letter, when they accept the appraisal, or at least they should be, they reserve the right to apply policy coverages post-award. And that's right. They should be able to do that. And if we don't know if they have the code coverage, we should be including everything related to the loss that would not have had to happen but for the peril. And I will also elaborate or add to that there seems to be some room for interpretation on whether or not coverage is open and what that actually means.
Right.
I'm of the school of thought that coverage is peril specific. So if they've opened the coverage for hail or hail and wind or whatever, then everything that was damaged by that peril that can reasonably be attributed to that date of
Correct.
loss,
yes,
is on the table for appraisal. And if there's a dispute with whether or not it should be addressed, then you better be specific in your award by saying, hey, we had this damage over here, did not appear to be consistent with this date, or whatever it is. Be specific in there. Leave the door open for both sides. The carrier has the door open to be able to apply the policy coverages after the award is issued. The policyholder ought to have some means of adding to it if new information comes down the pike.
Right. Well,
it's got to be fair. We're not here. I don't like even phrasing it as winning or losing appraisals, because we're getting paid either way.
Right.
We're providing a service and we're charging the same amount regardless of the outcome of the award, or at least we should be. If you're not, that's a problem. But the point of that is we're there to get it right.
Right.
Accurate, reasonable representation of the amount of the loss. Is it a number the carrier is willing to pay? Is it a number that can restore the property once the insured pays their portion, which is the deductible? Is the contractor going to make a reasonable profit margin? If you can meet those 3 conditions, get it done.
Yep. Well, Justin, this has been a great conversation. I do appreciate the time you've taken today.
Thank you very much.
Do me a favor and give yourself a plug, name, company, how do people reach you just in case, and what markets do you serve?
Yeah, so I serve the tri-state area up in Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania. Most of that I handle remote, but I've got a team on the ground there that can handle the day-to-day on-site operations. And my personal primary focus is the DFW Metroplex, but statewide Texas and up into Oklahoma. I'm referral based only. I've only ever operated on word of mouth and referrals because I think that's more valuable than any any ads you can run. Is not that I'm against that. I've got a marketing degree, so I get it. I understand it, but it's hard to beat somebody vetting and vouching for you. Name of my company is Addison Loss Consulting. We do PA representation, loss consulting, as is in the hint of the name, and insurance appraisals. And we run the whole gamut. I started in just hail and wind claims at the beginning of my IA career, but within 6 weeks, not even lying on that, I was handling total loss homes in Joplin and Birmingham and Tuscaloosa. And so by just the grace of God, I have him to thank for all my blessings. I got thrown into the pit and had the blessing of the opportunity to be able to learn about the complicated side of insurance claims, not the straightforward everyday, wind and hail. And so that's giving me an opportunity to mentor people and make sure that I can bring them up in the mindset of looking at what can the policy do in those awful situations, and why should it behave any differently in the smaller claim situations.
Right.
The policy should be interpreted as broadly and loosely as reasonably possible, because that's what the insurance code says. Seek to find coverage. So that's my goal, and that's pretty much driven every business decision I've made, where I work, who I work with, and all that. So you can reach my phone number, 817-996-1088, and on Facebook is probably a pretty good way to get in contact with me. I try to be a resource on there. And get a little spicy sometimes, but there's a lot of bad information out there, and if we don't nip it in the bud, it's going to propagate. So that's probably the best way to get in touch with me. Find me in the comments section when I'm taking a break outside or on the bathroom or whatever it is. But yeah, thank you very much, Shane. I really appreciate it, man. I've enjoyed this opportunity in the conversation. It's so refreshing to have an opportunity to have an exchange with somebody who's kind of on the same wavelength, but at the same time also has the knowledge and experience to back up why we came to these beliefs that we hold true.
Right. Yeah. And, obviously, thanks to everyone for, tuning in. Thanks to Justin for his time. Justin obviously is a public adjuster and appraiser. So you would think, isn't he your competition? No, I don't see him as competition. I see him as a peer. We talked about earlier in the podcast that there are not enough policyholder advocates on this side of the fence we can't help everybody, right? So I definitely don't see him as a competitor, if you will. I see him as a colleague and a peer. So that's why he's here, and we're talking about the industry and things like that. So if you have any questions about the topics of today, be sure to leave a comment, like and subscribe. And you can also find us on Facebook, PALCO Claims, YouTube, Instagram. You can go to our website, palcoclaims.com. And if you have any questions that we can help with, I'd love to be a resource for you. I know Justin would be too. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Can I add one thing, Shane?
Oh, yeah.
The carriers don't look at each other as competition. They're working together. They're all paying the same lobbyists. They're all contributing to the same campaigns. If we look at each other when we're on the same side of the fence as adversaries, we are never going to win this war. So I appreciate that you see the fact that we are all here to work together for one common goal. And if we have a scarcity mindset where we're trying to outcompete one another, the policyholders are the one who suffer in the end. Nobody can do it all.
Right.
Nobody can handle everything. The pie is infinite. Let's all help each other get a bigger piece.
That's right.